You may ask yourself, what's the single most important event that's taken place in the history of mankind? Ever since Adam and Eve to date, what is the single most important event that has occurred? A lot of people would come up with a lot of guesses. A lot of them would be specific to a single person. A lot of them would be specific to a particular war or a particular civilization. To me, there's really only one. It all falls down to one event that is critical. If you believe in a God, if you believe in the God, the one and true living God, then you need to believe in Jesus. And if you believe in Jesus, then belief in his suffering, his death, and his resurrection back to life, and then ascension into heaven. That is the single most important event. The entire Bible is all about Jesus and all about this one event. It all focuses, centers, rotates around this one important sequence of events over a 3-day period. The problem is, though, you know that. You know, you've heard of this, you know, this is the gospel, the classic good news of Jesus Christ. Yes, but what you may not know, it has not been taught for decades now, not regularly, probably since the 20s and 30s and 40s, 1940s. It's the full story. It's been watered down. It's been made more palatable. It's over the years more and more. It's all about self-help. It's all about everything but the gospel. And if it's the gospel, it's a quick overview on Easter. And then we do a disservice to ourselves by focusing just on the 30,000 foot level that Jesus was beaten, he was whipped, flogged to within an inch of his life. He was nailed to the cross, hung there for 6 hours until he died. And he was removed from the cross, put in the tomb. 16 guards, a custodial Roman guard was put into place. So there's always 4 men on duty roughly at the 4 points of the compass, north, south, east, and west, covering the 4 different primary directions. And if they were to fail, it was a Roman custom that that person would be killed, he would be beat to death by his fellow soldiers because it was their lives that he put at risk. That's a very heavy motivator to stay awake and to do your job. Even with the 16 guards there and the various temple guards, the Jewish temple guards who were there to make sure that the Romans did their job, the priests were not going to just trust them. And even though the tomb was sealed with the governor's seal, and you wouldn't want the wrath of the governor to come down squarely on you if you were the one to break that seal. With all that in place, Jesus still rose. That's part of the common message. Those 3 elements. The tomb, the door, the stone was rolled back, weighing somewhere between 1.5 and 2 tons on average during that day. That thing was moved back, not by his scared and hiding fishermen and tax collector disciples who were scared that they were going to be the next ones who would be hunted down and put on the wooden cross. But message, the untold message is that what happened first in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night that Jesus was betrayed and arrested. We know that from Easter Sundays that he went further into the garden, leaving 3 of his disciples behind, and knelt and prayed in anguish, in incredible anguish that we will never, ever understand how deep and passionate and troubling his anguish was, to the point where capillaries burst and the drops of sweat mixed with blood hit the ground. And the reason for that is not that we commonly hear or assume. He was envisioning the cat of 9 tails, hitting it and digging into his flesh and ripping it off. I'm sure he had seen flogging before. It was common. It wasn't preparing for the 7 to 9 inch long nails that would be driven through his wrists. In those days, the Jewish people considered the wrist part of the hand, or through his feet. As painful and horrific as that was not why he was in such dire anguish. 3 times he said, God, my Father, let this cup pass from me. 3 times he said that in earnest. And 3 times he finished those statements with, but not my will, but thy will be done. What was this cup? What was in the cup that caused such horrific anguish? For 3 centuries after the death of Jesus, thousands of Christians were crucified, were flogged and crucified. Some hung upside down until they died. Others coated with a substance that could be lit, and they were human torches. Many of these thousands went to their death singing and praising God in holy joy for the honor to suffer and die the same way that their Lord and Savior had. How could this be? How could they go to the cross in joy? Such bravery, such holy bravery. But yet, Jesus, cowering, scared to death, in deep anguish, however you want to classify it, because he's worried about the flogging, he's worried about the cross. No way. No way. Those people, those men and women were braver than Jesus? No way. So what was in the cup? The wrath of God. A perfect God requires a perfect sacrifice, a perfect lamb without blemish, sinless. That was Jesus. A perfect God requires this perfect sacrifice. Payment for every sin that has ever been committed throughout eternity past to when Adam and Eve first took the bite out of the apple and committed the first sin. Centuries upon centuries upon centuries ago. All the way till the return of Christ into the future, whether that's tomorrow or 1,000 tomorrows from now. Every sin, there are 6 billion plus people on the planet right now. How many sins are committed each and every day? Add up all those sins throughout all human time. an unfathomable amount, essentially immeasurable amount of sin. Some of it horrific, some of it ghastly. That sin had to be paid for. Jesus did not pay for that sin through flogging and through hanging on the cross for 6 hours. Yes, that was an important part. Yes, if it was horrific. Yes, it was a heavy price to pay, but that did not counter all that sin. What countered that sin was the wrath of God. As Jesus hung there, about midday after the first 3 hours, it became dark, as it says in the Bible. We're not talking a 3-minute eclipse, total eclipse of the sun. We're talking 3 hours. From noon to 3, it was dark. And from noon to 3, Jesus writhed on that cross because his soul, his inner being was being pummeled. It was being crushed by the all-powerful God, paying for every sin ever committed for all time. Only a man who was holy man and holy God could do that, could take that punishment. You and I could not do that. We would not be the perfect sacrifice to begin with. We would not be worthy of that. Only Jesus was. Only he, with his strength and his power and his deity, could take that punishment. That's what he was thinking about as he knelt, bleeding drops of blood in horrific anguish in the garden. He, being fully man and fully God, knew his Father well enough to know his complete power and the complete potential of suffering that could be inflicted on Jesus on that cross. He knew what was coming. And it was horrific. Horrific. He knew he had to suffer that. No one but other than Jesus could have even handled that kind of anguish. The cup of the wrath of God, which is mentioned many times throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, long before Jesus was ever born. Look it up. The prophets. Jesus suffered horrifically on that cross for you and for me, for us. One pastor described trying to visualize all this sin as picturing a dam 10,000 miles tall, 10,000 miles wide, holding back a torrent of unimaginably great water. You're standing there 1,000 yards from that dam, and in an instant, the wall disappears, and that huge amount of water comes hurtling towards you. And at the last second before it reaches you, the ground opens and all of it disappears as it's consumed by the earth, so that not even one drop hits your sock. That's what Jesus faced in the garden. As he hung there on the cross, after the 3 hours, and every last sin had been paid for, he said, tetelestai, a Jewish term for, an accounting term for it fully paid. It is finished, fully paid. He had taken that cup and he had drunk it down. every last drop. And when he was finished, he turned that cup over, slammed it down, and said, "It is done."